Gary Anthony Ramsay with your Hour News Now Rewind. Stories making headlines for the week ending February 19th, 2011. Our top stories include: the budget battle begins as the White House moves to slice more than $1 trillion in spending, but Republicans fight to make even deeper cuts. After rejecting the Obama high-speed rail plan, Florida's governor sets off a race debate over stereotypes. An Ohio Nazi serial killer who targeted blacks is put to death 27 years after his conviction. The Tunisia effect spreads from Egypt to Bahrain and Libya, but the military cracks down hard in both of those countries. Whoopi Goldberg gets snubbed by the New York Times, but then apologizes to them. And as the Oscars approach, what are your top 10 African-American experience films? Our top story. The budget battle begins on Capitol Hill after the president reveals his spending plan with more than $1 trillion in spending cuts. Republicans say, however, it's not deep enough. Republicans are putting forward their own budget blueprint. It calls for far deeper cuts in federal spending to reverse the course of soaring budget deficits. The battle over how much to cut from the federal budget will dominate the Washington political scene for the foreseeable future and also sets the scene for the 2012 presidential election campaign. The gap between the two parties over budget seems to be huge, but President Obama says even in the wake of last year's election, most Americans want to see both sides find common ground. Well, the debate over the budget and the size of the federal government is also expected to be a major issue in the battle for the 2012 Republican presidential nominations, which officially will begin early next year. Several potential Republican presidential contenders are expected to announce their plans within the next few months. Well, part of the president's budget from last year included plans for a high-speed rail line that stretches across the country. But those plans are being derailed state by state, as governors have rejected the federal money set aside to pay for part of the program. The latest to reject money is Florida Governor Rick Scott, who said no to $2 billion. Scott says his state doesn't have the other $3 billion that it would have to come up with to finish the project. The rail in Florida was supposed to run from Tampa to Orlando and was expected to create more than 24,000 jobs. John Kasich of Ohio and Scott Walker of Wisconsin have already said no to the administration's plans for their part of the $53 billion that was supposed to be spent on passenger trains and high-speed rail projects over the next 6 years.
Governor Scott also had tongues wagging in his own state after he met with black members of the state legislature. During that meeting at the governor's mansion, he said, quote, "I grew up probably in the same situation as you guys. I started school in public housing. My dad had a 6th grade education." Some angry lawmakers said he implied that all black legislators hailed from the ghetto and had undereducated fathers. Scott set up the meeting to discuss budget cuts that were targeting the African American community.
In Ohio, a Nazi wannabe who idolized Hitler is put to death more than 27 years after his conviction for the killing of 3 black people that he admitted he hunted. Frank Spizak died by lethal injection on Thursday. A self-proclaimed neo-Nazi, he was convicted of killing 3 people around Cleveland State University campus in 1982. In his trial, defense lawyers argued he was insane and put him on the stand to make their case.
I felt like I was finally doing something constructive for my race and for my people.
Spizak's final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was rejected late Wednesday afternoon. Spizak was the last person in Ohio to die from an injection of sodium pentanol, as Ohio has chosen to go with a more available drug. In Los Angeles, the city's first African chief of the fire department is sworn in. Darrell Osby, a 27-year veteran, will now lead that city's 4,400 firefighters. Osby has been a top commander during a number of LA fire crises, and he will succeed P. Michael Freeman, who served as the department's commander for 21 years. In Washington, not far from his budget fight, the president took time to honor several Americans with the highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom. Among those to receive the accolades, Congressman John Lewis, poet Maya Angelou, and basketball great Bill Russell. The ceremony was held at the White House and also included awards to financier Warren Buffett, violinist Yo-Yo Ma, and the 41st President of the United States, George Bush Sr. He has dedicated 70 of his 86 years to public life. President Harry Truman established the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1945 to recognize civilians for their efforts during World War II. President Kennedy reinstated the medal in 1963. to honor distinguished service. In your Hour News Now World Wrap, there's a new era in Egypt after Hosni Mubarak steps down from power after 30 years. The historic move has sparked protest in other parts of the Middle East, which are being handled in very different ways in those countries. In Bahrain, police and armed units have clashed with protesters who are demanding changes in that country. Bahrain, however, is a monarchy, and the ruling family has ordered an immediate crackdown on demonstrations. At least 60 people have been reported missing by human rights groups. At least a dozen people have died. More of the same in Libya, as crowds demanding that Muammar Gaddafi step down have been chased from demonstrations by the military. In the capital city of Benghazi, more than 60 people have been reportedly killed in clashes with Libyan security forces. Protesters have claimed the Libyan government has brought in mercenaries to help quell the unrest. In more news from Egypt, CBS News says that on the day of Mubarak's departure, one of their reporters was beaten and sexually assaulted. Lara Logan is back in the U.S. recovering in a hospital. The network released a statement saying the incident took place in Tahrir Square. In the statement, CBS went on to say that Logan and her security team were, quote, surrounded by a dangerous element amidst the celebration. According to the CBS statement, there were over 200 people in the mob. In the crush of the mob, she was separated from her crew. The statement continued. She was surrounded and suffered a brutal and sustained sexual assault and beating before being saved by a group of women and an estimated 20 Egyptian soldiers. Now that's your World Wrap. In entertainment news, Whoopi Goldberg rants after being left out of a New York Times article which listed some previous black Oscar winners. The Academy Award winner herself said that she was upset and ranted on The View the next day, calling the article shoddy reporting. But the article was being specific about Oscars won after 2001, the year that Denzel Washington and Halle Berry both walked away with statues. Ms. Goldberg won her supporting actor Oscar for Ghost in 1990. 2 days later, while saying she still felt sad that she, Louis Gossett Jr., and Cuba Gooding Jr. were left out of the article, she said the article was confusing, but she apologized for calling the reporting shoddy. And finally, as the Oscars approach, it's time to consider what are your top 10 or 20 African-American experience films or TV shows? Is it the Civil War drama Glory, the movie where Denzel Washington won his first Oscar? Is it Roots? Is it The Color Purple? Well, make up your list and compare it to ours, the ONN Top 20 African-American Experience Films of all time. Feel free to comment on our picks if you like them, and especially if you don't. For a complete look at any of the stories you've seen on The Rewind, remember, as always, go to the bottom of the webpage, find the link of the story you'd like to see, and click your way through. That's your Hour News Now Rewind for this week. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsay.